Okay, so we had left off with Unit 5.1, Part 3. This is the continuation. Marat is dead. The Jacobins have closed women's political clubs. And so now we're getting to yet another name change because you hadn't, I'm sure you were getting tired of the National Convention. So here we are with the Committee of Public Safety, 1793 to 1994. 1 year, so you know we're going to have another change coming. So, just to keep you on your toes. So, what's going to happen is by the summer of 1793, the Committee of Public Safety is going to become an emergency government to deal with internal, so all of this chaos going on within the revolution, they're trying to get rid of those who are anti-revolutionary and the mountain fear of the Girondins coming back in power. And so we have the Committee of Public Safety becomes an emergency government, so it's dealing with those internal problems and also the external problem of war, that one battle victory that the French had and now have declared war on everyone else. And so this is going to cause challenges to the revolution. So the Committee of Public Safety is going to be led again by our man Maximilien Robespierre. He's going to become very important to us with this part of the French Revolution. He's very influenced by Rousseau's general will, but he's going to kind of contort that to mean we 12 people, the leaders, are on the Committee of Public Safety. We can determine what's good for the general will. And mainly this becomes because these individuals, the mountain, are scared and want to take care of the enemies of the state. Remember we talked about this hypersensitive nature of fearing that all of these people that they have put in awkward positions are going to come after them. His right-hand man here is going to be Louis Saint-Just, who is also a major leader. And they are going to ally with the sans-culottes to help the urban poor. So taking those sans-culottes have kind of been driving the revolution from behind the scenes. This is where we're going to get the law of maximum, which is a planned economy. So this is, again, some control over economy. It's a planned, controlled economy to respond to food shortages and related economic problems. This law of maximum is going to allow France to urge total war against its external enemies. It's going to enable them in this decree by taking control of some of the economy and allying themselves with the urban working class. The government decreed the maximum allowable price was fixed in paper assignats, which is our paper money, for key products, the staples. The price of bread are one of these, and it's fixed at levels that even the poor, such as the sans-culottes, could afford. So no more bread shortages that had kind of started us off here with the Women's March to Versailles. We had white bread for the wealthy classes up to this point, because it's softer and it tastes better, and it was made out of the best flours. And then the poor were only able to get, the hard, lesser grained wheat bread, which is contradictory to what we pay for today. The wheat bread's the most expensive and the white bread is the least expensive because it's bad for you. But anyway, at this time, that was a sign of that you were a lesser class. And so they're going to get rid of the white bread altogether, and everyone will have the bread of equality, which is the brown bread. Rationing will be introduced to make sure bread will be shared fairly across the board, and the government will nationalize many small workshops and requestion raw materials and grain from peasants. And so they're going to be coming very much back in. We'd started this revolution wanting to get rid of mercantilist ideas and control over the economy, and here we are in effect with an early version of socialism, and this will even continue into arms and munitions control, government control of these produced for the war effort. Well, also something done right here which is unique, and that is going to be the sans-culottes' invested interest in slavery in the French colonies, and it will be abolished at this time period. So I not only got to talk to you about one military victory by the French, I get to talk to you about another. I know what's going on with today. And so Lazare Carnot is going to reorganize the French army, and this is called the Levée en Masse. The entire nation will be conscripted or drafted into service as war was defined as a national mission. The size of the army will grow to 1 million at this time, which is unprecedented in the history of European warfare. This time period could pretty much be classified as cold steel, passion, and patriotism. And by July of 1794, the Austrian Netherlands and the Rhineland were once again controlled by France, and the first coalition, or those that the French were fighting against, is falling apart. The planned economy and the law of maximum have made mobilization effective, and nationalism will become a strong force uniting French people. So nationalism kind of liberté, equalité, fraternité. Victories led the relaxation of emergency controls, but the reign of terror will still extend. Okay, so they can breathe a little bit. They're being successful in their internal law. Sorry, I don't know what that pop-up thing was. I don't want to do that. What is going on? Anyway, and so they're going to relax on the emergency controls, but the reign of terror will still extend. So the reign of terror is our next terminology here, following our Committee of Public Safety, and this is going to be 1793 to 1794, so not really following as much as concurrent with. And this is the most not just probably, it is the most notorious event of the French Revolution. Most of you probably walked into these French Revolution lectures and knew the term Reign of Terror and at least something of what it meant. And so in the Reign of Terror, we're going to get the law of suspects, as we had gotten the law of maximum. And alleged enemies of the revolution will be brought before revolutionary tribunals that were created to hear cases of treason. This was a political weapon. This was not just a way to rid yourself of enemies against you, but also to strengthen your own political agenda by making sure there's nobody on the opposing side. This was instituted as an alternative to the lynch law of the September massacres. So now we have the law of suspects. It's at this very same time that Louis XVI, as we talked about earlier, was convicted of treason and executed on January 21st of 1793. So it coincides with this law of suspects, or the we must get rid of, if you're not with us, you're against us kind of mentality. Queen Marie Antoinette, as I had discussed earlier, will be executed later in the year, October. And about 40,000 more people throughout France will be executed or die in prison under the Reign of Terror or the law of suspects by the guillotine. This would be where Robespierre would say, he had given us the birth of a republic requires the death of a king. Well, now he's saying the continuation of the republic requires the death of many. Okay, so those that would try to put a stop to it. Executions at this point become even more of a spectator sport. There's, still that 7 seconds that the person's aware. I don't know if these people were really morbid or they just didn't know that, but that creeps me out. The terror will become a political weapon and not directed really at any class in particular at this time. Remember, it's 40,000 people, and I'm going to give you the breakdown of percentages, but I want to also draw back into your recollection when we talked about Burke. And 6 months into the revolution, he had said, you guys need to slow your roll. There's going to be chaos, death, and destruction. And people at this time are going to be like, maybe he wasn't so far off, and begin to think the French are crazy. Because they have just really ultimately replaced their king with a dictatorship. So back to the 40,000 people who are going to be taken out during this time period. 8% were nobles. 14% were bourgeoisie, mainly from the rebellious southern cities. 6% were clergy. 70% were peasant and laboring classes. And most deaths occurred in places in open revolt against the convention, such as the Vendée in western France. And another 300,000 are going to be in prison. And these are enemy of the state. And look, 70% are peasant and laboring class. What are the sans-culottes? Peasant and laboring class. It was anybody who could be seen as not agreeing with these revolutionary ideas. And it really, what this speaks to, these percentages, is that eventually no one could feel safe from Robespierre's reign of terror, as leading Jacobins who opposed Robespierre were eventually executed one by one. You just hope your name did not come up on this list. And we'll come to the slide in just a second. So, Girondists are going to be executed in September 1793, including Charlotte Corday, who has assassinated Marat. So Girondists, again, brought to the forefront and made an example of. The Mountain is very fearful of them trying to take back control. So Charlotte Corday, who had assassinated Marat, is executed. She's 1 month before Marie Antoinette. Jacques Hébert is going to be a radical social democrat who led the Angry Men, or the Herbicites were his followers. And this is where we're going to get something called the Cult of Reason, which opposes Robespierre's in their actions, because the Hebridists were a party of extreme terror. Most of its leaders were executed in March 1794. So it's at this point that we even get that you're going to be executed for being too terrorists during the Reign of Terror. So there is no winning here. They were killed for their excess of zeal for the revolution. So if that doesn't show you that nobody was safe, I don't know what will. The Hebridites have been responsible for deaths of 2,000 people at Nantes, where they were loaded on barges and deliberately drowned, and the Paris Commune was thus destroyed. Danton, who we had mentioned in today, or if you were yesterday's lecture, and his followers will be executed in April of 1794, and they were accused of being enemies or against the revolution. So here's where we get a term called the Republic of Virtue, and it's going to emerge as the new political culture under Robespierre to bring about or to try to expand revolutionary virtue. This is a call to try to get people actively involved. By virtue, he means get on the side of the Republic, get on the side of the revolution. Robespierre and this Republic of Virtue is going to be de-Christianizing France, and this is going to be that second attack against the church, just as the first one we talked about with the constitution of the clergy. So the cult of supreme being will be introduced in June 1794, and it is a deistic natural religion in which the Republic was declared to recognize the existence of God and the immortality of the soul. And the Notre Dame Cathedral will be taken and converted into the Temple of Reason. So they've taken one of the most visual aspects of the church at this time, will turn it into the Temple of Reason. There'll be festivals of reason, and so this deistic natural religion will be promoted by the Republic, by the revolution at this time. It replaces the Gregorian calendar with the revolutionary calendar. We're going to get like months called like snowy and windy or flower or hot instead of the traditional calendar. So this Temple of Reason and nature. It replaces the old order with the new order. And what Robespierre says is you cannot have virtue without terror, and terror cannot exist without virtue. And so it's this reaction to try to get people more actively involved. And you know psychology. If the church had been what was governing their life, you don't want anything governing them over what you want them to do, and so you replace that with your own entity. The end of terror is not going to come to an end until opposition begins to mount against Robespierre, because now people are not only like, okay, they're killing all these people, we've lost sight of what we're doing, they're even killing the poor laboring class, which that's who they are, and we have this cult of reason, and they're killing all of these people who have been our leaders before. This opposition isn't really going to mount against Robespierre until July 1794, and some followers of the Enlightenment who were influenced by the ideas of Voltaire will help to bring about Robespierre's downfall, because they see that this is not the enlightened movement, the enlightened motion that they had signed up for. This is not the Enlightenment. This has taken a whole nother path. So on July 27, 1794, Robespierre was denounced in the convention. At a convention meeting. He will be arrested there and executed the next day along with his close associates. So what do you do if you can't beat him? Join him. So the people against him will do the same to him that he had done to all of the others and his followers, and they will be executed. After death of Danton, which we had just talked about in the Great Terror, the Reign of Terror, many in the National Assembly had feared they might be next, which is really what prompted Robespierre's end. If he had not made his followers and those fellow National Convention members feel unsafe by allowing people to turn in name, like he had killed his followers, his friends, his comrades in the revolution. If he had not gone this far, every time he showed up at the National Convention, it was a new list of names, and you just hoped your name was not called. So it was this fear of them being next that will ultimately put the end to Robespierre. And the working class radicals no longer will support him after he takes out Hebert and the Hebertites, who had been killed for being too zealous in the revolution, and that's what they had wanted. And so he really steps the boundary when he starts to take people in the National Convention and also people that are very radical and very much supported by the sans-culottes. So leads us to the Thermidorian reaction of 1794, which ends the Reign of Terror altogether. So Robespierre's execution with his followers, a big blow. The Thermidorian reaction, 1794, is going to end the Reign of Terror. And this has constituted a significant swing to the right, to conservatism. So where we had the Mountain sitting in the uppermost left-hand seats in the National Convention, we are now going to go to the opposite side. We're going to swing all the way to the right into conservatism. People have seen enough liberal, and they are done. Respectable bourgeoisie, middle-class lawyers, and professionals who had led the liberal revolution of 1789, just as the Mountain had feared, will reassert their authority. It will reduce the powers of the Committee of Public Safety and close the Jacobin Club. And the Girondins, some who had fled that will come back, will be readmitted. So this is going to give us a shift here to the Directory. And just because you were getting tired of the National Convention, we stay with one name for too long. This is where we get the Directory, our new government, 1795 to 1799. A new constitution is written in 1795, which set up a republican form of government, and this will equal a new assembly will choose a 5-member executive branch to govern France called the Directory. So where did all of this start? With the bourgeoisie and the Third Estate. Where are we going to bring it all back to, and what the convention, the National Convention, and the Mountain had been afraid of? Back to the bourgeoisie. So we've come full circle, and they're going to come into their own again after all this crazy. So we're back to where we started here. So a new assembly will choose a 5-member executive branch to govern France called the Directory. A bicameral legislator, which means there's a legislation, an executive branch, and a military branch. And the executive was the Directory, made up of 5 directors. Almost all adult males are still able to vote, but they could only vote for electors. And office holding was reserved to property owners. So we're going to see the return of some things, of the promotion of the middle class. You can kind of think the crazy part of the revolution was all about the lower working class. So back to bourgeoisie. Middle class will control the government at this time, and this became the Directory's major weakness, as its support or power came from a narrow band of French society. We just got through the Reign of Terror. Who were the sans-culottes going after in the Reign of Terror and so many people killed? The middle class. There are not many left, and the other people who were not killed had fled. And so this becomes the major weakness of the bourgeoisie during the Directory time. All economic controls were removed, which the Mountain had put in, so all of those maximum laws, all of those were removed, which ended the influence of the sans-culottes at all. Okay, more paper money will be printed, and this will allow prices to rise sharply. Without the law of maximum, there is no more control on prices or inflation or any of this, or any of the few good things that the Reign of Terror got done. So the middle class will seek peace in order to gain more wealth and to establish a society where money and property determine prestige and power. And so they are trying to turn back to the idea that money and property should determine your prestige and power, alternate to the view of the sans-culottes who believe that, equality across, or that everyone should be at the level of that laboring working class. The Directory in 1795 will disband women's workshops and urge them to go home and tend to their homes. So we're backtracking a little bit. You can start to see some of those things that we listed on the board that had become a fixture in 1799 or in the early 1790s, kind of shifting away. This was a bourgeoisie, male-dominated government. So any of those female rights that had come for the forefront, or the working laborer class that had gained some privileges, those are going to be minimized or gotten rid of in favor for the upper middle class wants and needs. And so challenges to the Directory are challenges to the middle class. In October of 1795, the aristocracy will attempt a royalist uprising, so trying to bring back, we still have those fringe of royalists who had supported the king. And reaction to a provision in the Constitution stated that 2/3 of men elected to the legislature had to be ex-members of the National Convention of 1789 to 91. So this is not going to be what our new bourgeoisie members would like to have represented there. So rebellion at this time, due to the royalist uprising, is going to be put down with the help of Napoleon. This is our role in the rise of Napoleon, and why our next part of the unit is all about him. He will happen to be in Paris at this time and be able to put down this uprising. Thus, the constitutional republic made itself dependent at this point on military protection at the outset. This is why a military leader is going to be key to coming in and being the next phase of all of this. So this is where that shifts. The sans-culottes repeatedly criticized the government and its economic policies, but not have the influence to force change. Okay, they no longer have the influence. The mountain is no longer in control. And they had been on the outskirts able to do some things, but it wasn't really, they really didn't be able to get crazy during that reign of terror until they had people within the government, and they no longer have that. So this is where we get the conspiracy of equals, led by Gracchus Babeuf, who formed to overthrow the Directory and replace it with a dictatorial democratic government, which would abolish private property and enforce equality. And so this is a push, hearkening in again, that it's equality for all, not just property and the wants of the middle class. It was regarded as a precursor to modern-day communism, what Gracchus Babeuf was proposing. And the Directory will repress the conspiracy of equals without difficulty and will, of course, what else? Guillotine Babeuf. Growing inflation, remember they're printing all that money now that they're back in and prices aren't stable, and mass public dissatisfaction will mount, but it will be ignored by the Directory. They're worried about themselves and the middle class, and they are going to do, well, I don't know, the same thing that Louis XVI did when the people were dissatisfied. So the government was bankrupt, corrupt, and unwilling to control inflation that severely hurt the impoverished masses of French peasants. Should all be sounding very familiar. Isn't this where we started? Anyway, so the elections in April of 1797 result in a victory for the Royalists. Right, but the results, of course, will be annulled by the dictatorship of the Directory, by the Directory, okay, by our middle class. They will annul the elections which have given victory to the Royalists. They believe that a dictatorship is favorable to the revolution established post-Fructidorian terror. And this is the idea of maintaining the republic as a free or constitutional government. This is the point where it will be abandoned. Okay, so they're going to start to see a dictatorship favorable to the revolution after the middle class annuls the vote in the Directory. Okay, so military successes during the Directory will enable it, however, to remain in power. So that's the only thing that's saving it is some military victories, and they become very dependent on the military and are running in a dictatorship-like style. The first coalition, so the war that we're fighting with everyone, will effectively be defeated by 1797, and England will be isolated and removed its army from the continent, and so they are no longer a threat to the French right now. The French will also defeat the English armies in Egypt at the Battle of the Pyramids in 1798. So they've removed their army from the European continent, but still some remaining in Egypt. And so they will defeat, the French will defeat, I got to talk about the French defeating 3 times in this lecture. Wow. Okay. The Battle of the Pyramids in 1798. However, Napoleon later will have his navy destroyed by England's Lord Horatio Nelson and the Battle of the Nile in 1798 as well, but we're going to come to all of that with Napoleon in the next unit. So what I really want to bring you to close with here is the end of the Directory. A conspiracy will emerge because the Royalists had won an election and still weren't able to end the Directory. The people are dissatisfied and still not able to get rid of the Directory, and because they're militarily backed. Okay, so what is going to happen is a conspiracy will emerge to save the revolution because the Directory is fine with the dictatorship, and that's not what the revolutionaries had set out for, and prevent a Royalist return to power. Remember Saiz, who had been our third estate rep in the very beginning of all of this, okay? Abby Saiz will become our leader of the conspiracy. He's the one that had written, what is the third estate? We're everything. What have we got? Nothing. What do we want? Something. So he becomes the leader of this conspiracy to bring the revolution back, but also to prevent a royalist return to power. He will invite Napoleon to join him and his conspirators and overthrow the Directory. And Napoleon will do so upon returning from Egypt with forces. What was the Directory dependent on? The military. What is Napoleon? A military leader. And so this is going to be a shift here. And this is called the coup d'etat Brumaire of November 1799. So upon returning from Egypt, Napoleon returning from Egypt with his forces, he will drive legislators from the Legislative Assembly. He will drive them out militarily, and a new constitution will be established. And wait for it, I know you just wanted the name to change again. This new constitution will establish the beginning of yet another government called the Consulate era. And this is where a plebiscite or a general referendum will take place. So it's a plebiscite, it's a vote. And it will be overwhelmingly approved. I think it's like 3 million to 1,500, something crazy like that. And Napoleon becomes the first consul in the consulate area, which is a term taken from Rome to mean overall leader. Okay, and so Napoleon will come in and he will defeat the strength that the Directory had, which was their military, and he will replace it with an overwhelming vote. And so we will pick up with Unit 5.2, Part 1 and 2 about Mr. Napoleon, and then we will kill him next week. Have a great weekend. Look at your essential questions. We were on 4 and 5. We will talk about them in class. You do not have to post anything to Edmodo. Please do message me if you have any questions.